All right, today we are unpacking what is probably the biggest evolution in React since it was first created. We're talking about the massive shift back to the server, and it's a revolution being led by Next.js.
Okay, I want to start with a pretty provocative question here. The thing is, the way we're all building web apps is changing, and I mean fundamentally changing. So if you're a React developer, you really need to pay attention to what's happening. So to really get a grip on where we're headed, we've got to take a quick look back at how we got here. You know, the world of standard React, built on what we call client-side rendering, or CSR. Now, you know the drill with a typical React app, right? The browser gets this tiny little HTML file, and then this massive bundle of JavaScript. And what does the user see? A blank white screen, until all that JavaScript finally loads, runs, and paints the content on the screen. It gave us these amazing, rich, interactive single-page apps, almost like desktop software in a browser. But man, that power came with some big trade-offs, especially for that first page load.
And this slide really nails the core conflict we were all dealing with back then. On one hand, you get this incredible, fluid user interactivity. But the price? Oof, terrible initial load times. You know, that dreaded blank page. And SEO? Forget about it. Google's crawlers would just see an empty div. For the user, it was loading spinners. And for us, it was this all-or-nothing JavaScript bundle that had to be downloaded and run before anything could happen.
Okay, so the industry knew this was a problem, right? The first real answer that came along was server-side rendering, or SSR. And the promise was huge. Maybe we could get the best of both worlds.
The concept was actually pretty simple, but really powerful. Why not let the big, beefy server do the heavy lifting of rendering the initial page? That way, the browser gets a fully formed HTML document right away. The user sees content instantly. It's amazing for SEO, it feels faster. And then, this process called hydration kicks in. That's where the browser downloads the JavaScript in the background and sort of reattaches all the interactive bits, the event handlers, the state, to that static HTML, making it a living, breathing React app.
But it wasn't perfect. SSR just created a different kind of all-or-nothing problem. It was like a waterfall. First, the server had to fetch all the data for the page before it could even send the first byte of HTML. Then, the browser had to download all the JavaScript for the page, and finally, it had to hydrate the entire page before you could click on anything. So yeah, you saw stuff sooner, but you couldn't interact with it. It was a step up for sure, but it wasn't the end of the story.
Okay, this is it. This is the part that changes the game completely. Let's talk about React Server Components, or RSCs. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. This is a fundamental rethink of how the client and server work together in a React application. So get this, for the first time ever, we can have React components that send zero, and I mean literally zero, JavaScript to the client. Just think about that for a second. You can have a component that lives and dies on the server. It can talk directly to your database, it can do all its rendering, and all it sends to the browser is the final HTML. Its own code never ever leaves the server.
And this for sell quote just nails the performance benefit. What it's saying is, the core JavaScript your app needs is a fixed, predictable size. It's cacheable. So you can go ahead and add 100 new pages, 1,000 new features, and the amount of JS a new user has to download doesn't grow. That is an absolute game changer for building large, scalable applications.
Okay, we've all written this code a million times, right? The component mounts, you show a spinner, you fire off a use effect, you fetch some data, you set state, and you re-render. It works, but it's also why our apps are littered with loading spinners and these weird waterfalls of data fetching happening right in the user's browser.
Now just look at this. The new way. With a server component, your component can just be an async function. You just await your data right there, that's it. Because this is all happening on the server, you can talk directly to your database, hit internal APIs, whatever you need. It's not just way cleaner to write, it's faster because you're not making a round trip from the browser back to the server just to get data.
So this is all an amazing concept, right? React server components. But how do we actually use them? Well, that's where the Next.js app router comes in. It's the framework that makes this whole new architecture a reality for us developers.
And here's the really big shift in thinking. With the app router, everything is a server component by default. You are automatically getting all these benefits from the second you create a new file. It completely flips the old model on its head. You start with zero client-side JavaScript, and you only add it when you need it. And how do you build your pages? It couldn't be simpler. Your app's routes are just a direct reflection of your folder structure.
You want a /blog route? You create a blog folder and put a page.tsx file in it. Boom, you're done. It's so intuitive, you can look at the file system and immediately understand the structure of the entire application.
Okay, so the big question is, what about interactivity? What about use state? What about on-click handlers? If everything's on the server by default, how do we build an interactive UI? Well, it's super simple. You just opt in. When you need that client-side interactivity, you just put this little string at the top of your file, use client. That's your signal to the bundler that, hey, this one needs to run in the browser and have its JavaScript ship.
So here's your mental model, your cheat sheet. Basically, use server components, which is the default, remember, for anything that involves data, accessing backend stuff, keeping secrets safe, or using big libraries you don't want to send to the user. And then you switch over to client components only for the things that have to run in the browser, like state, event listeners, and things like that.
All right, this brings up a really practical question I hear all the time. With all this new stuff, isn't Next.js total overkill now for, say, a simple internal dashboard or a little marketing site?
And honestly, the answer we're seeing from the community is not really. It's actually becoming the new default. The performance benefits you get right out of the box are just so massive that it's worth it, even for smaller projects. You're just starting from a much, much better place, with a faster and leaner foundation by default.
And if you need more convincing, just look at features like server actions. This is wild. You can write an async function that lives on the server, to update a database or something, and then just pass that function directly to a form's onSubmit handler on the client. That's it. No more creating manual API endpoints, no more boilerplate fetch calls for mutations. It's a huge boost for developer productivity.
So the takeaway here is that the lines between the front end and the back end are getting really, really blurry. We're entering this new, much more powerful and efficient way of building for the web. And this isn't just some small update, This is a whole new era for React developers. The server is back, it's a first-class citizen, and it's changing everything.